My shoelace was still in my hand when I heard my own name used like a piece of furniture. Just drop them all at Mom's for the summer. She's alone anyway, she'll say yes. I stayed crouched by the hall table, one knee on the hardwood, my fingers gone still around the lace. It was the Tuesday before Memorial Day, and through the kitchen doorway I could see the corner of Marcy's elbow, the sleeve of her blue cardigan, resting on the counter where I keep the coffee tin. 8 grandchildren. She said it that plainly like a number on an invoice. 8, ages 2 through 15, for the whole summer, starting the following Friday. I did not move. I did not clear my throat or straighten up or do any of the things a person does when they want to be noticed. I let the lace go slack in my hand and I listened, the way I used to listen in a courtroom when a witness said something they didn't realize mattered yet. She doesn't have anything else going on, Marcy said. And I heard the small clink of a mug being set down, unhurried, certain. Nobody in that kitchen lowered their voice. Nobody thought they needed to. I thought about the folder in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, the one none of them had asked about in 9 years, and I thought, not yet. I finished tying my shoe. Before I go any further, welcome. I'm glad you're here. If you've ever been counted out by the very people who should have known better, a family member, a coworker, someone who decided your quiet meant your weakness, stay with me. Subscribe if that sounds familiar. I have a feeling you'll want to hear how this one ends. I spent 31 years as a certified court reporter. Family law mostly, with a long stretch in probate court toward the end. If you've never sat in a probate hearing, I'll tell you this much: nothing teaches you the weight of a signature faster than watching 2 grown siblings argue over their mother's china cabinet, because nobody wrote down who it belonged to. My job was to get it all down. Every word, every objection, every pause where someone almost said something and then didn't. I typed at 220 words a minute at my fastest, and I never once let a transcript go out with a guess in it. If I wasn't certain of a word, I flagged it, checked it, fixed it before it left my desk. That habit didn't stay in the courtroom. I dated everything, every letter, every receipt, every conversation worth remembering. I still have a filing cabinet in the spare room that would make an auditor weep with joy. 9 years ago, I set up an account at the credit union on 5th Street. Not a checking account, an investment account, the kind that grows slow and steady if nobody touches it. I asked each of my 3 children to put in $200 a month, and I matched whatever the 3 of them contributed combined, dollar for dollar, out of my own pension. The idea was simple. Someday, when the grandchildren were grown enough to remember it, we'd use it to put a down payment on a place at the lake, somewhere with a dock and too many bunk beds, somewhere that belonged to all of them instead of just one house that would eventually get sold off and split 3 ways. I drew up the paperwork myself, the way I'd watched 100 estate attorneys do it in front of me over the years. I had it notarized. I filed the original in that same cabinet, in a folder labeled with the date, the account number, and one line at the bottom that none of my children ever read closely enough to remember. 9 years of $200 a month for ways, compounding quietly while everyone assumed it was just sitting there, mine to manage and eventually theirs to spend. I never once forgot what that folder said. I'm not in the habit of forgetting things I wrote down myself. I lost my husband, Walter, 4 years ago this past March. Heart, not lungs, which surprised everyone who knew him. He was the one who quit smoking, not me. The house was paid off 2 years before he passed, so I've had the good fortune of never worrying about where I'd sleep, only about the quiet that settles into a house built for 2 and now holding 1. To my children, that quiet reads as availability. Retired, alone, free, 3 words that, strung together in their minds, apparently mean say yes to anything. I already keep the grandchildren most Wednesdays and every other weekend, and I've never once complained about it, because I love those 8 kids more than I know how to say out loud. The fun comes up maybe once a year, if that. Someone will mention the lake house idea over Thanksgiving, half joking, and I'll nod and say it's growing nicely, and that's the end of it. Nobody asks for numbers. Nobody asks to see the paperwork. It exists in their minds the way a spare key exists, useful theirs whenever they need it, and not worth thinking about otherwise. I stood up slowly from the hallway and moved close enough to the doorway to see without being seen. My back against the wallpaper. Walter and I had hung ourselves in 1994. Marcy was at the counter, still in her cardigan, and David had pulled out a kitchen chair backward and was straddling it the way he did as a teenager, forearms crossed over the back of it. Priya sat across from him, phone in hand, scrolling something with one thumb. 10 weeks, David said. That's the whole window we'd need. Portugal, then the boat thing in Croatia after. She won't mind 10 weeks, Marcy said. She had them for 6 last summer and never said a word. Priya laughed without looking up from her phone. What's she going to do, say no? She's not going to say no, Marcy said. And there was a lightness in her voice, the lightness of someone deciding something that had never felt like a decision to begin with. She'll probably be thrilled. Gives her something to do. David reached for the coffee pot and topped off his mug unhurried. And we used the lake fund for it. It's basically just sitting there anyway. Flights, the villa deposit, whatever's left over goes toward July. That's what it's for, Marcy said. Family stuff. She set it up for the grandkids, Priya said, finally glancing up. This is for the grandkids, David said. Us having a marriage that survives having 8 of them between us is for the grandkids. He laughed at his own joke, and the other 2 laughed with him, easy, unbothered. Then he said the line. I felt it land somewhere behind my sternum, the way certain testimony used to land in a courtroom right before I typed it word for word, knowing exactly how it would read back later. She doesn't have a life anymore, he said, stirring his coffee, not even lowering his voice. So it's not like we're taking anything from her. Nobody disagreed. Nobody paused. Marcy reached for the sugar. Priya went back to her phone. The 3 of them kept talking, flight dates, whether her hip could handle the 2-year-old, whether they should tell me this weekend or wait until closer to June, while I stood in my own hallway in my own house, holding a shoelace I'd already tied twice. I didn't walk into that kitchen. I want to be clear about that because I've thought about it since and I know what it would have cost me if I had. 31 years of sitting still while other people said things they'd later regret taught me that the moment you interrupt is the moment you become the story, instead of the moment you become the answer. So I picked up my purse from the hall table, walked out the front door like a woman with an ordinary errand, and got into my car. I didn't start the engine. I sat in the driveway with my hands on the wheel and let myself go through it, piece by piece, the way I used to go through a transcript before it left my desk. 9 years of contributions. A notarized agreement. A folder with 1 line at the bottom that none of them had ever bothered to read. I knew exactly who controlled that account. I had known it since the day I filed the paperwork. Tonight I decided I wouldn't say a single word about any of it. Not one. That evening, after the house had gone quiet and I'd heard David's car pull out of the driveway, then Marcy's 20 minutes later, I went to the spare room and opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. It sticks a little in humid weather. I've been meaning to fix that for years. The folder was exactly where I'd left it, in the same order it had been in for 9 years, because I'm not a person who moves things once they're filed correctly. Account agreement. Contribution schedule. A copy of the notarization, the ink from the credit union stamp still sharp at the edges. I set the folder on the kitchen table under the good light, the one Walter installed over the stove so I could read recipes without my glasses. I read the account agreement the way I used to read testimony, slowly out loud under my breath, the way you catch things you'd otherwise skim past. Section 3. Fund disbursement requires written approval of the designated trustee. Not a vote among contributors. Not a majority. 1 name, 1 signature, mine attached to every dollar that left that account for any reason at any time. I had written that clause myself. I had asked for it myself, back when Walter was alive and the 2 of us sat at this same table deciding how to protect something we hoped would outlast us both. If you've ever found the one piece of paper that changes everything, the deed, the will, the letter you weren't supposed to see, tell me in the comments. I'd like to know I'm not the only one who's sat at a kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night, reading 4 sentences over and over, feeling the ground shift very quietly under a house that hasn't moved an inch. I read the trustee clause a second time, slower than the first, just to be certain I hadn't imagined the weight of it. In the morning I called Rosalind. We'd worked together for over 2 decades. She was the family law attorney I transcribed more depositions for than I could count, and the only person left from that stretch of my life who still called just to talk, not just to catch up. I need you to look at something for me, I said. Not as a friend. As a lawyer. That's an ominous way to start a Wednesday, she said, but I heard her pull out a chair on the other end. Send it over. I photographed all 4 pages and emailed them before we hung up. She called back within the hour. Teresa, this is clean, she said. Cleaner than most of what crosses my desk. You're the sole trustee. There's no cosigner, no majority clause, nothing amended since the original filing date. Has anyone tried to change this? Not that I know of. Then nobody can. Any disbursement, $1, $10,000, needs your written approval and your signature. Not a vote, not a family discussion. Yours. And if someone tried to withdraw without it, the credit union would reject it outright. This isn't a joint account, whatever your kids think it is. It's a trust with one person authorized to release funds, and that person is you. I asked her to check the current balance while she had the account number in front of her. She read it back to me plainly. $41,600. I sat with that number for a moment after we hung up. 9 years for contributors, and not one of them had ever once asked to see where it actually stood, or under what terms it could be touched. They had built their whole summer around an account they'd never bothered to understand. Marcy called me on Thursday afternoon, while I was watering the tomatoes on the back porch. "Hi Mom, quick thing," she said, the way people say quick thing when it isn't quick at all, when it's actually the whole point of the call. "The kids are going to come stay with you starting Friday for the summer. David and I already talked about it, it's all set." I kept the hose steady on the tomato bed. "Is that right? You don't need to do anything," she said, breezing past the pause the way she'd been breezing past things her whole life. "We'll just pull whatever we need from the lake account for flights and stuff. David's already looked at it, there's plenty in there. You won't even have to think about it." "How thoughtful," I said, and I meant it exactly the way it sounded, which is to say I let her hear whatever she wanted to hear in it. "So Friday works?" "Around noon." "Friday works fine," I said, and I moved the hose to the next row of tomatoes unhurried, the way I water them every single day of the summer whether anyone is watching or not. "Great. Love you, Mom." "Love you too," I said, and I meant that part without any complication at all. I hung up, set the hose down, and went inside to make a phone call of my own. I asked all 3 of them to come by Friday morning before the kids arrived, just for coffee. Marcy assumed it was sentimental. David assumed it was logistics. Neither of them assumed it was the folder, open on the table, in the same spot where the coffee tin usually sits. "I want to talk about the lake fund," I said, once everyone had a mug in front of them. "Sure. Is everything okay with it?" Marcy asked. "It's exactly as it should be," I said. "I'm the trustee. I have been since the day I opened it." I turned the second page toward them and read section 3 aloud slowly, the way I once read testimony back to a courtroom that had stopped listening halfway through. "Written approval of the designated trustee. 1 signature. Mine. As of today," I said. "Any withdrawal needs 30 days written notice and my approval, in writing before it's released. That includes flights, that includes deposits, that includes anything at all." David set his mug down harder than he meant to. "That's not what this account was for." "It's exactly what it was for," I said. "I wrote the clause." "So you're just controlling it now?" Marcy said. "I've controlled it the entire time," I said. "I'm only now mentioning it." I told them the extended summer childcare would need to be scheduled going forward, and compensated like any other care arrangement. Neither of them had an answer for that. For the first time in a long while, the kitchen was quiet. 3 weeks later, Marcy called before dropping by. Not to announce anything, to ask, "Would Saturday work, Mom? We'd love to bring the kids over for the afternoon if that's all right." I sat with the phone in my hand for a second longer than I needed to, just to feel the shape of that word. Ask. David texted a few days after that, something I don't think he'd done in years, thanking me plainly. For a Wednesday I'd kept the 2-year-old so Priya could make a doctor's appointment. No mention of the fund. No mention of Friday. I still water the tomatoes every evening. I still sit in the same quiet house Walter and I built a life in. But I've come to understand there's a difference between being alone and being taken for granted. And it isn't the house that changes when you finally know which one you're living in. It's everyone around you. Last week, tucked behind the trust papers, I found something else. A handwritten note from Walter about the lake property itself, dated years before any of this began. I haven't told anyone yet. Subscribe because I'm still deciding what to do with it.